Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Klaus Richter, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 23 years old. Before the war, my world was built of stone and mortar. My hands were rough not from a rifle, but from brick and trowel. I was a builder. I understood foundations. I understood the simple, honest logic of a wall. One brick laid true upon another, bound by good mortar, creates something strong. Something that stands, something you can trust. It was a world of plumb lines and spirit levels, of tangible, solid reality. You knew where you stood, you knew what would hold. The war taught me that some things are built only to be broken. They took my builder's hands and taught them to load the 75mm cannon of a Panzer IV. They gave me a new wall to trust, not of brick, but of Krupp steel. They called our Panzer a fortress on tracks, a rolling bunker, and for a long time I believed it. I laid my trust in its steel plates the way I would in a foundation I had laid myself. It was my world now, this cramped, noisy steel box. But in the winter of '42, in the endless white hell of the snow outside Stalingrad, I learned what happens when the very ground beneath your fortress gives way. The cold, that is what I remember first. It was a living thing. It was not just an absence of heat. It was a presence, a predator. It seeped through the thick steel of our panzer, through the wool of our uniforms, through our skin and into our bones. It made the metal inside so cold it felt like it could burn you. My world had shrunk to the space inside that tank, a metal womb reeking of diesel, gunpowder, hot oil, and the sour sweat of 4 men who had not washed in weeks. There was Gunther, our commander, his eyes red-rimmed and perpetually scanning the featureless horizon through his periscope. Ludwig, our driver, who spoke more to the engine than to any of us, coaxing it, cursing it, pleading with it to keep running on the thin, watery fuel we had left. And young Hans, the gunner, whose face was still smooth enough to be a boy's, but whose hands on the traverse wheels were steady as a surgeon's. We were part of the 24th Panzer Division, or what was left of it, the great 6th Army, trapped. Encircled, General Paulus promised relief. The Führer promised an airlift. The radio crackled with heroic music and bold assurances, but my builder's sense told me the foundation was cracked. The promises were weak mortar crumbling in the frost. Out there, beyond our vision slit, was nothing, just snow, an ocean of it stretching to an indifferent gray sky. It was a landscape designed to erase men, to swallow armies. And we were a tiny steel island in its midst, waiting for the tide to rise. Days blurred into a routine of shivering and starvation. A slice of frozen bread, a cup of ersatz coffee that was little more than bitter, hot water. We talked of home, of Leipzig. I would close my eyes and feel the phantom warmth of a summer sun on my back as I laid a course of bricks. I could almost smell the dust, the fresh mortar, feel the satisfying heft of a solid, well-made thing in my hands. I'd remember the taste of my mother's stew, the sound of the trams clattering down the street. Then my eyes would open to the dim, greasy light of the Panzer's interior, the low growl of the idling engine our only lullaby, and the memory would vanish like a wisp of breath in the frigid air. Our world was sound, the constant, rhythmic vibration of the Maybach engine, the squeal and clank of the tracks on the frozen earth, the crackle of the radio. These were the sounds of life. Silence was death. Silence meant a stalled engine, a thrown track, a final, frozen end. My job, when I wasn't loading shells for hands, was to keep the machine alive. I was the crew's mechanic, the bricklayer of our small, steel world. I used my old skills to improvise. A bent piece of metal became a clamp, a torn strap, a gasket. I understood how things fit together, how to brace the weak points, how to make something hold just a little longer than it was supposed to. Then came the day the silence fell. It began not with a bang, but with a rumble, a low, deep vibration in the earth that was not our own. Gunther's voice, sharp and tight over the intercom. Ivan is coming. He didn't need to say more. Through my small vision slit, I saw them. First as small, dark specks on the horizon, then growing, resolving into the unmistakable shapes of T-34s. Not one or two, a wave. A tide of steel, their sloping armor perfectly suited for this terrain. Behind them, swarms of infantry, ghosts in white camouflage against the snow. The world dissolved into controlled chaos. My training took over. Gunther calling out ranges, hands traversing the turret, his movements economical and precise. My hands, almost of their own will, grabbing an armor-piercing shell from the rack. The well-oiled movement, slam it into the breach, close it. Yell loaded, the tank bucked as hands fired. A gout of flame and smoke, a miss. The Soviet tanks kept coming, inexorable. The air in the tank grew thick, hot, choking with the smell of cordite. Another shell, slam, close, loaded, fire, a hit. We saw one of the T-34s lurch to a halt, black smoke pouring from its turret. A small victory. a single brick laid in a collapsing wall. The intercom crackled with the screams and reports from other panzers in our company. Panzer VII is hit, they are brewing up. Panzer III is immobilized. The sounds of our little world, our steel fraternity, being torn apart one by one. My builder's logic fought against the insanity. This was bad design. A fatal flaw in the plan. We were being thrown away like loose gravel. Then it was our turn. It wasn't the thunderous explosion I had always feared. It was a deafening, metallic crack. A sound that went through the hull, through the floor, and into the teeth of every man inside. The whole world jolted sideways, throwing me against the shell casings. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. The lights went out. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Silence. The terrible, absolute silence we feared more than anything. Ludwig was yelling, cursing the engine, trying to restart it. The starter groaned, a pathetic, dying sound. Nothing. Gunther's voice was strained. Driver, report. What is it, Ludwig? Engine is gone, Herr Lieutenant. The block is cracked. She's bled out. And then the smell. Acrid smoke. The sharp, terrifying scent of burning oil and electrical wiring. A flicker of orange light from the engine compartment. My deepest, darkest fear. Fire, a slow, cooking death in a steel box. My mind, the practical builder's mind, tried to work, find the source, use the extinguisher, fix it. But this was not a cracked pipe or a loose wire. This was a mortal wound. The Panzer was dying, burning, hands screamed. The turret hatches jammed. The hit had warped the frame. Trapped, we were trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through me. My lungs burned. The smoke was thicker now, a choking black cloud. We were going to burn like the others. We were going to be cooked alive in our own fortress. Ludwig was hammering on the driver's hatch with a wrench, his shouts turning into desperate, strangled coughs. This is where my training ended and the animal began. I was not a soldier. I was not a bricklayer. I was a creature fighting its way out of a tomb. I scrambled over to the loader's hatch above me. I put my shoulder into it, heaved with a strength born of pure terror. It gave a screech of protesting metal, but it didn't open. The frame was bent, jammed. The heat was becoming unbearable. I could feel it through the soles of my boots. Gunther was yelling something. Use the charge, the emergency charge. Every panzer had a small explosive charge to destroy it if it had to be abandoned. It was a last resort, but now it was our only way out. He fumbled for it in the dark, his hands shaking. Get back, he yelled. I pressed myself against the far wall, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A small, dull thud. A flash of light, the hatch blew upwards, ripped from its hinges, and a torrent of clean, impossibly cold air flooded the compartment. Out, go now. Gunther shoved me towards the opening. I scrambled up, my hands raw, pulling myself through the narrow space. I tumbled out onto the snow-covered hull of my dying Panzer, and I froze. The world outside was gone. The world I had known 5 minutes before was gone. In its place was a scene from hell, painted in fire and snow. Our company, it was a scrapyard. Panzers lay burning, twisted black skeletons against the pristine white. Black columns of smoke clawed at the gray sky. The air was filled with the crackle of flames, the hiss of hot metal meeting snow, and the distant, sporadic pop of cooking ammunition. There were no other survivors in sight, just the dead machines. My comrades, my brothers in arms, incinerated in their steel coffins. Hans and Ludwig scrambled out behind me, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with shock. Gunther was the last. He had a piece of shrapnel in his leg, and he fell heavily onto the engine deck. We were alive. We had escaped the fire. But as I looked around, as the searing 30 below zero wind cut through my sweat-soaked uniform, I realized we had only traded one tomb for another. We had left our steel wall behind. Now there was nothing between us and the horizon, nothing between us and the Red Army, nothing between our soft, warm bodies and the killing cold. We were no longer Panzer crewmen. We were just 4 men alone in the middle of an endless, frozen graveyard of our own making. I spent my life after the war building things again. Houses, walls, libraries, things meant to last. But I never looked at a foundation the same way. I learned at Stalingrad that even the strongest wall, the thickest steel, is nothing without solid ground beneath it. Our ground, our leadership, our glorious promises, our entire reason for being there, it had turned to ice and mud. And the whole structure, our whole world, came down on top of us. A man who builds with stone knows you must respect the material. You cannot force a brick to be something it is not. The war tried to make us into heroes, conquerors. It tried to build an empire out of boys from Leipzig and farmers from Bavaria. But we were just men, just bricks. And when the mortar of lies and promises failed in the Russian winter, we were not an army anymore. We were just a pile of rubble in the snow. The hardest lesson is not that things break. It is that you can be the strongest part of a structure and still be utterly doomed because the design itself is rotten from the start. This memory is a piece of shrapnel I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.